Well, thank you, Buffy, for the time and the great performance here.
Thank you.
In continuing with the thread and the San Francisco Arts Commission and your great performance tonight.
Thanks.
I had some questions for you to ask on behalf of the BAVAC and also KPFA Radio, if you don't mind, please.
Yeah, but first, I'd just like to say how nice it is to see you again.
Oh,
And
thank you.
this audience
Gosh.
was so wonderful.
Weren't they?
Yeah, really, really nice.
I know. I'm trying not to be nervous with you. But
It's just me.
oh, Buffy, I was a young Vietnam veteran trying to find my way in the late 60s. Your music was part of my own decolonization and development as an Indian man. You were already so aware of the injustice facing Indian people, and despite opposition from mainstream media as well as mainstream politicians, you remained committed to getting the message to our brothers and sisters in struggle. So this is a two-part question that I have. First, what were your earliest inspirations that led you to focus your work on the struggle for Indian rights? And also, what gave you the courage to press forward despite the hostile political environment you faced and limited coverage in mainstream media? Your earliest inspirations.
I think I was, I had kind of a weird childhood. I was adopted, and I had kind of a weird childhood. I was adopted, and they called it the 60s scoop, but it had been going on for much longer. The 60s scoop in Canada, where a lot of kids were taken from the reserve and wound up in foster homes. And none of us, we don't even have a horoscope, We don't know when we were born. We don't know who we are, where we came from. So in dealing with that, there was only one other Indigenous person in my town. And I was living a very strange life, and it prepared me for adulthood. Dig this. I was told that I couldn't be a musician because I would always fail music class in school because I was dyslexic in music, and nobody had ever heard of that. And then I'd go home and I'd play fake Tchaikovsky and fake Mozart, right? So that, and the fact that in our schools, we were told there weren't any more Indians. You can't be an Indian because there aren't any more. They're all vanished. Oh, there may be 3 or 4 over there in Arizona. But in New England, where I was growing up, I was living a reality that was not the same reality as everybody else was living. I was a musician, and I was being told I couldn't be one. So what do you do with that? So I think I found out very young that sometimes the world is weird. And I think if you know that from the beginning, I think you have kind of an advantage. I mean, a lot of people believe that the world is, A, B, C, D, E, but for a lot of us, it's not. It's as though they've thrown the Scrabble chips on the floor and it's all mixed up, and you find your way through. But that's power. That's good. So I was a very mixed up kid with maybe not a whole lot going for me, but because I found my own way of doing things in music and in indigeneity, here I am. We all do our lives, It's different for each one of us.
Mm-hmm. And was it courage? Courage that pressed you forward?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it was. I think what I wanted to do as a young entertainer, I wanted to give people something that they couldn't get anywhere else in the first place. In other words, I wasn't trying to copy Pete Seeger or somebody. I wasn't trying to be somebody who already. I wanted to give people uniqueness, and really what gave me the courage to step on stage was the content of the songs, because I knew what I was singing about, even if it was new to an audience. Like Now That the Buffalo's Gone, or My Country 'Tis of Thy People You're Dying. Later on, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. People did not know this information. And before I was ever a singer, I was a teacher. So I never looked at an audience as someone that I wanted to wound or get even with. And I think there was a time in the 60s when people, not Native people so much as, I had written Universal Soldier. Donovan was getting credit for it, but I had written it. And it was popular to protest, and a lot of people, they really didn't have anything to protest, but they were trying to pretend. And they were writing songs about, I don't know, the one that comes to mind is The Eve of Destruction, right? but there was no real positivity in it. So I feel as though as an activist, what anti-war activism or whatever the activism is, if you're trying to heal people and give them information that they don't have, you're a totally different person from somebody who just wants to get out there on a stage and be mad, So that's what I got from my growing up. It wasn't so much courage as a recognition that I had something to give and I probably wasn't going to last in show business. And I was right about that. I didn't last in show business in the U.S. I did elsewhere in the world, but not in the U.S. I was taken out. So, it wasn't, I didn't feel courageous at all.
Oh. Well, Buffy, you and I met in 1991 by way of our mutual friendship with Floyd Red Crow Westerman and Bill Means, both members of American Indian Movement. Mm-hmm. And Bill Means was the director of International Indian Treaty Council at that time. And what were your earliest memories of the American Indian Movement? And how would you characterize the contributions of the AIM to the current strength of Indian consciousness and movement building around the country and around the world?
I think I probably first met the Belcourts, Russell, Dennis. I was in St. Paul or Minneapolis in some parking lot. And it might have been when I was visiting Eddie Benton Benet's, Heart of the Earth School, and the Red Schoolhouse. There were in Akwesasne Freedom School. I was a teacher. People didn't know I was a teacher. They thought, she's a singer. But I was a teacher, so I was very much interested in the early schools, and AIM was also supportive of that. And the AIM guys were very different from me. Some of them had been in prison. They were street guys. They were grassroots guys. They were tough. And I always admired what they were trying to do in St. Paul and Minneapolis in particular at first, in informing young people that just because a guy wants to arrest you doesn't mean you have to go to jail, right? In other words, they were letting Native people know about human rights, about Indigenous rights. And I really admired them for that. They were pretty unripe, in my opinion, when it came to the way they treat women. They didn't really have much of a consciousness, in my opinion, in those early days about elders. And I was spending a lot of time on the reserve with older people who I thought were just magnificent. But so AIM was doing different things than what I was doing. And I really admire them in some ways. I think they had a big impact on a couple of generations of Native American people, but also Indigenous people all over the world. And it was not just the people that we think of as having been in the American Indian movement, in AIM. In the 60s, there were, the Boston Indian Council? There were Native American Council. I think they were in Chicago. There were groups of Native activists all over the country. Fishing rights, that's right. Hank Adams and the McLeods and those guys. Yeah. No, yeah. So you and I, we both spent time with those people. And AIM got so famous that I think very often the public isn't as aware as I wish they were of the other organizations. I mean, Annie Mae Aquash came out of the Boston, I think it was Boston Indian Council. Wasn't that the name of it? Something like that, yeah. So I think that, AIM went on, and because they were, there were some really personable people there. And there were some unfortunate pictures associated with them, a guy with a gun, they'll always take a picture of an Indian with a gun, yeah. So I think that the public got to miss a lot of the other great work that was going on, not only in the U.S., but also in Canada. There were a lot of people, and there's still a lot of people. Resistance is not new. It's been going on for a very, very long time.
Well, thank you for that, Buffy. And I have a third question for you. And you've been very involved in efforts to come to terms with the harm done to First Nations people in Canada, as a result, for example, of boarding schools and other efforts to destroy Indian families, traditions, and communities. Some have called for a structured effort at reconciliation. In California, our new governor, Gavin Newsom, recently issued an apology to California Indians for the genocidal acts of early settlers and early administrations. Here in San Francisco, we recently convinced the Board of Supervisors to remove a statue depicting an Indian man kneeling at the foot of the Pioneer. What do you think is necessary to bring about healing and reconciliation?
I think there's another word that needs to come before healing and reconciliation, and that's truth. In Canada, we call it truth and reconciliation, and it is really working. I mean, I used the word genocide in the 60s, and I think it was the first time publicly that people had heard anybody use the word genocide in connection with Native American people. I mean, you just didn't say that, right? And yet, it took 50 years for truth and reconciliation to come about in Canada, dealing with exactly the issues you just mentioned, Tony, especially residential schools. And it's huge, but it's not going on in the U.S. And I think a lot of Native American people aren't even aware of how we're even more oppressed than you know in the U.S. In Canada, well, Canada's not perfect either, but I think the farther south you go for Indigenous people in the Americas, the harder it gets. So the truth that I'm talking about, I mean, read Andre Resendez's book, The Other Slavery. If you're a California Indian, or if you live in California, I believe he's a professor at UC Irvine, I think. And he's written a book called The Other Slavery. I mean, the things that Americans don't know about how Indigenous people here got to be poor, how we got to be homeless, landless, poor, messed up, our health destroyed. I mean, it was very, very systematic and deliberate by some people, and we keep pretending that, it was the measles. No, it wasn't the measles. It was freaking slavery. It was hundreds of thousands of Native American people being shipped to the stock markets of Europe, the Philippines, the Middle East, hundreds of thousands. I mean, we never face the fact. We never face the hard truths that we need to face as Native people and as people who are interested in justice. The fact that the doctrine of discovery made it legal for explorers to come, and if they found inhabited lands, the people weren't even, the inhabited people, that would be us, the people inhabiting those lands, we weren't even considered human, We were either to be killed or enslaved. If we were converted, we're still going to be enslaved. But hundreds of thousands of women and girls especially, you have to understand that Europe at the time was practicing sexual repression upon men. European men were sexually repressed, and they were rewarded with the right to rape. They were rewarded with Indigenous women and girls, and that nobody ever tells you that. Well, Andre Resendez has the name, dates, and serial numbers on that, and he did his research in Spanish, in Spain, as well as in English. So that's a great, great book. And I think that what needs to happen is that Native American people ourselves have to be bulletproof educated when it comes to certain things. Every young person should understand what the doctrine of discovery is, and should understand that the doctrine of discovery is embedded in U.S. law. It's embedded in the law of all of the countries who were colonialized by England, France, Spain, Portugal, and the Dutch as well. And it was worldwide. So,
and the church?
Well, the church was behind it, but everybody was in on it. And I'm talking about slavery right now, just specifically slavery. The church was in on it. The bankers were in on it. The military were in on it. The kings and queens and people in velvet and pearls were in on it. The military was in on it. They were all in on it. It was money. It was money. It was exactly the same as it is now. It hasn't changed that much. When bad leadership, that's what happens. Bad leadership comes and goes. But the difference was that bad leadership happened in the Americas as well, but in Europe it was institutionalized. It was fortified by the church, the military, and the banks. So the fact that it was institutionalized is the truth. We have to come to grips with ways to present that truth in such a way that we're not hurting, wounding, getting even. No, that's not why we're doing it. the truth is something that each of us has to be able to deal with in ourselves, and we have to put it into words, our own words, so that whether we're talking to a child or some nice white person who would like to know, or some SOB who's not so nice, who needs to know, we have to be able to say, we need to be able to give them that information, not in an enema, no, not in an insult, not in pain. We have to be able to give them that truth in whatever way we're sensitive to understand that they can handle, you know? And so truth and reconciliation. And what was the third part that you mentioned? Truth and
what do you think necessary to bring about the healing and reconciliation?
Healing and reconciliation, yes, healing. Yes. See, that's why you have to have the truth, but you have to give it to people in a healing way. You can't use it as a club, you know, the eve of destruction, right? No, that's just emotion. So we have to get over our own, we have to deal with it ourselves like grown-ups, and it's hard. It's terrible, awful information. But we have to find ways to turn it into some kind of encapsulated poetry, I think. It doesn't have to be poetry, but however it is you talk, you know. But you have to get it straight in your own head first, and that takes a little bit of study, maybe a week. Learn what you're talking about and then give it to people in a way that is healing for all of us. But a lot of people don't want to do that. They haven't thought of it yet, maybe, but I don't know. That's what I think.
Very good.
Okay.
We will try that one. And thank you, Buffy, for being with us here in San Francisco and on this 50th anniversary of the Indians of all tribes and the Alcatraz occupation. As you reflect on these years, what gives you hope for the future?
Oh, a lot of things. Not just young people. I see old people. I see the lights coming on in the minds of old people even. You know, people of my generation who didn't used to get it, they get it better now. I mean, we're in a weird time in the U.S., right? Watching the impeachment hearings and all that and dealing with, you know, bad leadership and politicians and polarity and all that. That's not new, and we have survived this before. So what gives me hope are the people who recognize what that is and who continue to want to make things better, to heal, to reconcile, to deal with our brothers and sisters, whoever they are, in a meaningful way. And there's a lot of people. We had an audience full of them tonight. They're all over the place. So don't let that nonsense get you down. Bad leadership, you know, it's bad, but it's within ourselves to support each other, to heal, to do better. I think we are. I think there is.
Well, thank you very much, Buffy. Thank you very much for this interview. And indeed, it's a pleasure, honor, international treasure such as yourself.
You are a
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tony.
Aho.
Aho.